question mark has been written across the face of India. With Japan knocking at India's gates, the Congress Party, led by the now interned Gandhi and President Azad, made use of hooligans and agitators to press for a mass civil disobedience campaign. They professed passive resistance to the threatening invader. To the members of Pakistan's First Constituent Assembly, Lord Louis reads a message from the King proclaiming the new dominion. Britain and Pakistan part as friends, he said, both members of the British Commonwealth of Nations.
More than 500,000 Indians made pilgrimage to Puri, south of Calcutta, for the Jagannath Car Festival, one of the holiest observances of the Hindu religion. The worshippers believe that a visit to Puri
before the rains. You'll be going too, of course?
Oh, naturally. No one stays in Ranchapur during the monsoon.
No, only about 5 million people.
Oh, you know what I mean. Proper people. The kind of people one knows. It's so seldom out here one meets anyone from one of the real county families.
Captain Blumberg was just telling me something of the interesting history of the palace, the importance it played in the mutiny.
It seems the British never forget the mutiny of 1857.
Wait a minute. You know what you're going to do, don't you?
It would have been very uncivil of me to let you make such a long trip for nothing.
Where you going? Where are we going?
I'm going back to the ashram. Then I'm going to prove to the new viceroy that the king's writ no longer runs in India.
Hello?
Hey, are you busy?
Well, define busy.
All right there, big man.
Yeah, gotta check my schedule.
Wow. Well, do you have time to listen to a story?
That sounds ominous.
How so?
I don't know, it sounds like Jigsaw, like, do you want to play a game?
Just hear me out, will you? This is a good story.
Fine. What's it about?
Well, my grandfather.
The one on your dad's side?
Yeah, the one I never knew. And yet, his story seems so familiar.
How's that?
Even though I was just finding out about it, it felt like I had known all along. It's as if these memories had already existed in me. Were they hers? Or hers? Maybe they were his. Somewhere, somehow, I remembered everything. About home, about the riots, about independence, about politicians, about the British, about family, about death. And at the crux of it all sat a thin, crooked line. But before we get to that, we have to start at a place much more personal.
I will tell you the exact moment. I was in the nursing home where you were born, and I called Dad and told him he was not keeping well that time, and then he had to remain at home, and the rest of us we came to the nursing home to see you. And when I told him, he was I could see that he was in his tears, and then he said that I'm going to call everybody. And actually he did, and when I heard it later, that he called all of his friends and close relatives, and he told everybody that he has a grandson. So he was so very happy. That time it was according to his wish. We did not have his funeral in a traditional way. So in a traditional way, what we do generally is we have some hymns and mantras, and we have to pray for him in front of the sacred river, Ganges, and there we have to do some rites.
That can be done in Kolkata?
That can be done in Calcutta, of course, but religiously there are one or two places in India where people go to do this. So Varanasi, on the bank of the Ganges, that's the most sacred place to do this. So I have a plan to go to India and you're also coming, of course. So we'll do that. We'll go to Calcutta first, and our ancestral home, and then we'll go to Varanasi. We'll be there for a couple of days, do these rites there, and come back.
Our destination was set. Waiting patiently at the edge of the Ganges was one of the oldest cities in the world, Varanasi. But where our expedition in India began was just as significant, since this was exactly where the British East India Company had made their start some 200 years ago, Bengal. The road to complete colonial control had been a difficult one for the British. Their first opposition had been the rivaling imperial powers of the Portuguese and the Dutch. Under the leadership of Robert Clive, the British East India Company began taking over trade in India. Money was made from indigo, salt, cotton, silk, and tea. In 1757, the company made its first proper move to gain political control in India. The then Mughal state of Bengal fell, and Clive became the governor of the presidency of Fort William, Bengal. Annexations and alliances followed all through the region as the company grew to be a true force. A private army of around 260,000 soldiers were amassed, and by the start of the 19th century, they controlled much of India. This private army would, however, be their downfall, as 50 years later, the Indian population that made up the majority of the army revolted. The Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 was a bloody affair. The rebelling Indians went on a destructive path, and the company reacted in kind. Vishnu Godse, a priest who happened to be traveling through India at that point, writes about the destruction in front of him. Those who were known to have helped the rebel Peshwas were hunted down and hanged. Some were tied to the mouths of cannons and blown to smithereens. After 2 days of this, the British and their troops moved towards Bithur. On the third day after Nana Sahib had left, the British entered Bithur early in the morning and began a massacre. No one on the streets were spared. At the end of the day, when thousands of citizens lay dead, the British began to pillage the town. They looted as much gold and silver as they could carry with them. Some people tied their precious family jewelry and gold around their middle and tried to swim to the other side of the river, but most of them were waylaid. Either before they entered the river by the British or after they had reached the other side by bands of dacoits who roamed the riverbanks looking for victims. Soon after the revolt, the mercenary army and the corporation was forced to surrender its power to the British government, and Queen Victoria became the ruler of the Raj. At the turn of the century, Gandhian politics took hold of India as she began her march towards independence. Bengal entered a renaissance with the brilliant works of Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, and Nazrul Islam. My grandfather, Manoranjan Sengupta, was born here, on the eastern side of Bengal in a city called Borishal. The year was 1928. India is still undivided and has to wait 19 years before independence. He finished his schooling in Borishal, and at the age of 18, with a want for higher education, moved to the biggest city in Bengal and the former capital of the British Raj, Calcutta. This was indicative of a drastically changing time in Indian history. In 1943, Bengal was ravaged by a famine. When asked to bring relief to the region with the help of wartime food supplies, then PM Winston Churchill stated that the starvation of anyhow underfed Bengalis is less serious than that of the sturdy Greeks. 2 million people died in the process. Famine also brought in a host of other problems. One of these was floods. Soon after my grandfather had moved to Calcutta, massive floods in Borishal put his family at jeopardy. Because of this, they too joined him in Calcutta. The year was 1945. Migration had become the norm in the region as India moved within a year of independence. The stage had been set for chaos. You look good, man.
Thanks. How's the wine?
Very white.
This place is old, huh?
Built in 1844, I think.
What is that, like 20 years before Canada was a thing?
And 100 years before India became independent.
Did you talk to your family about that?
What, independence? You know, it's interesting. No matter how old they were when it happened, they remember something or the other about the period.
Must have been a massive change.
Well, colonization had been a reality for generations. Hell, the first generation to be born in independent India had my parents in it. But they knew it was going to happen. They knew a year before independence it was already going to take place. But they also sensed that a lot of unrest was about to take over. Fearing they would be persecuted by the Hindu majority, politicians like Jinnah advocated for a separate state for the Muslims of India. The British brought in Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a person who had never set foot in India, and asked him to draw the borders. And thus, with a haphazard stroke, the cards had been dealt. India was divided into India, West Pakistan, and East Pakistan. Over time, Pakistan got divided as well. So the end result was that Punjab was broken in two. One side would become the Indian province of Punjab, and the other would become Pakistan. Bengal, on the other side of India, was also broken. One side would stay in India as the province of West Bengal, and the other would become Bangladesh. While my family had already moved to the Indian side of Bengal, their ancestral home in Borishal fell on the side of Bangladesh. But before any of these nations could have gained independence, the panic of being on the wrong side of the border gave way to a lot of chaos and violence. Jinnah called for 16th August 1946 to be Direct Action Day, a day where Muslims of India would come together and demand a separate state. That very same day, massive riots broke out in Calcutta. The riots were absolutely horrific. When I asked my great aunt about what it was like, she remembered some very specific stories.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of our elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end. No safety or surprise, the end. I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be so limitless and free? Desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land. and all the children are insane. All the children are insane, waiting for the summer rain.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
What happened is when I was in high school, few of my friends, they used to join me also. When dad taught me English or maths, they used to come and join, because dad was a very good teacher and loved by all. Nobody was afraid or scared of him as a teacher. So they were all interested to come, and they told me that can we join also whenever he is teaching you. I said, well, come over.
And he was more than happy to.
Yeah, I mean, he was always very enthusiastic to teach. There was no dull moment for him in doing that. And when he was when he fell ill and he was not being able to do it, that was his one primary sadness, that he cannot be with the students anymore. He had to lie down in the bed. So he loved it. that was one of his, one side of his character. He was very human. Sorry. And I heard there were many cases where people, after attending classes, people used to come and tell him that they were not in a position to pay. So in those cases, he was always excused all of them and let them study. So possibly at one point of time there were many students who didn't pay, but he had to run the school, right? So there were operation costs for that. Possibly he paid it from his pocket.
Did that ever put a strain on your family life as you were growing up there?
I was either very small or I possibly yes, but I never felt that, because his passion was, the degree of passion was so high. We never, possibly he struggled a little bit financially at those times. But I never heard from him when I grew up that he had to struggle. These negative points he never discussed. He always cherished to think that how successful he was, that he could render education to so many people. So that is a big thing in his character. They had a very happy married life. My mother was very supportive. Dad was not a typical person. He was a little different. They used to go to the theaters, cinema, and a lot of friends. I think they had a good life, very good life.
Does have a certain aura to it, don't you think?
Yeah, it is pretty calming, I guess. It's weird. I've never been in one before.
But people come in here all the time. You know, to us, it's a new space, but to others, it's established. It's an institution. It's a big part of their family's history and their lives.
Do you think that's just because it's a house of God, though? Or is it because they come here often enough that it starts to mean something to them?
Well, time has got to be a factor here. I think every place has memories attached to it, but that needs to happen over a period of time. And it's defined by the people who live near the place. Take Calcutta, for example. By itself, it means many things to many people. To me, it means family and home. But Calcutta has a long colonial history, and memories of how it was during the British Raj permeates through generations, post-memory. When I got to the city, and on the ride to my grandparents' home, I noticed the most interesting thing. And I imagine most travelers from the airport would see this, since it's on the way to the city center. Right as you're passing by houses and apartments and shops, there's a Big Ben.
Wait, what?
Yep, it's right there. Apparently, the chief minister of the province wants to turn Calcutta into London. Imagine that.
Is that supposed to be part of the aura of the city or something?
I think with time it can be. It really depends on the people. Is this monument going to have memories attached to it? I assume so. With time, it'll become a pillar in society, something that they can look to when they wish to define their environments. And for the people who are new to the city, like my grandfather's family was all those years ago, I wonder if they're ever truly able to attach themselves to the city. Years after they settled in, my great-grandfather did something really interesting. So you passed away in 1998. You were not able to do the full funeral rites. Can you talk about that a little?
Okay, it was his wish to not to go for a traditional funeral, what we see in our society. But what he wanted to do is to call all the relatives and friends, whoever liked him or whoever he liked. So, and the number was so huge, everybody liked him, and there was no enemy. I did not find a single person who was reluctant. And there was a small gathering where we called all of them, and I can remember everybody wanted to talk. And we had a problem. I mean, we didn't expect that. We expected that some of them will talk, some of them will listen, and then almost everybody was willing to talk. And some of them, they never spoke in front of an audience, but they were so emotional, and they all wanted to talk about him, all the memories.
Ever take